You've become too dependent on client relationships instead of company structure, the CEO told me at 8:14 on a rainy Tuesday morning. And that was the moment I realized 24 years of loyalty could be erased by a sentence rehearsed in advance. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and lemon disinfectant, the kind the cleaning crew used every morning before sunrise. I remember noticing the water rings on the polished walnut table, while Melissa from HR folded her hands together like she was preparing for prayer instead of termination. Outside the glass walls, people kept walking through the executive floor carrying laptops and paper cups as if nothing inside that room could possibly matter. My calendar invite had arrived at 7:12 a.m. Mandatory HR discussion. No explanation. No agenda. After 2 decades at Stratwell Consulting, I knew what surprise meetings meant. Companies only became vague when they were about to do something cruel. We're restructuring the client engagement model, Melissa said carefully. Leadership believes the company needs a more scalable approach moving forward. Scalable. Another corporate word designed to make human beings sound replaceable. I looked at the folder sitting in front of her before she even slid it toward me. Severance agreement. 12 weeks. Healthcare extension. Confidentiality clause. 24 years reduced to 14 printed pages clipped inside a gray folder. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. That seemed to disappoint them more than anger would have. Ethan, our 38-year-old CEO with expensive cufflinks and startup vocabulary, leaned back in his chair like he was trying to appear compassionate. "This isn't personal, Evelyn," he said. "We just believe the company needs fresher energy in client-facing leadership." Fresher energy. I almost smiled at that. 3 months earlier, I had personally saved the company's largest pharmaceutical account during a contract crisis that nearly cost us $80 million. 2 weeks before that, I spent 48 straight hours helping negotiate an emergency logistics deal for a hospital network after a cyber attack froze their operations. I knew which clients were going through divorces, which ones had children applying to colleges, which CEOs preferred phone calls over emails after 6 p.m. because they hated leaving paper trails. Stratwell owned the contracts. I owned the trust. But younger executives never understand invisible value because spreadsheets can't measure loyalty. Melissa finally pushed the severance folder toward me. "Your system access will remain active until noon," she said softly. That sentence told me everything. They were afraid. Afraid I knew too much. Afraid clients trusted me more than the logo printed on the building downstairs. I picked up the folder calmly and stood from my chair. Through the conference room glass, I noticed something strange. Across the hallway, sitting inside my office, was a young woman I had never seen before. Blonde. Maybe 28. My framed client awards were already gone from the shelves behind her. My stomach tightened for exactly 1 second before the feeling disappeared. Not sadness. Not anger. Clarity. Ethan kept talking, probably reading from some executive coaching article about maintaining dignity during workforce transitions, but I had stopped listening. Because at that exact moment my phone began vibrating inside my purse. Once. Twice. 3 times in a row. The screen lit up with names worth more than anything sitting inside that conference room. Client. And suddenly I understood something they didn't. They thought they had fired an employee. They had actually fired the woman holding $290 million of relationships together. I walked back to my office slowly, not because I was emotional, but because I wanted to remember every detail they would eventually regret. The executive floor felt colder than usual. The fluorescent lights reflected against the marble hallway in long white streaks, and somewhere near the reception desk, someone laughed too loudly at something unimportant. My office door was half open. The young woman sitting at my desk looked up when she saw me. She smiled politely, the way people do when they have no idea they are standing inside someone else's collapse. A cardboard box had already been placed beside my chair. Human resources always prepared those ahead of time. My family photo was inside. My navy coffee mug from Seattle was wrapped in brown paper. Even the orchid one of my clients sent after my mother died had been removed from the windowsill. I noticed my computer screen had already locked itself. Access denied. 24 years, and the system erased me in under 10 minutes. I placed the severance folder carefully into my leather tote bag and began packing the rest of my things without rushing. Nobody approached me. Nobody said goodbye. Across the hallway, I could see Ethan speaking confidently to a group of junior executives, already performing stability for the people beneath him. Then my phone vibrated again. Richard Dawson, Chief Financial Officer of Veritas Health Systems. One of our oldest accounts. I stared at his name for a moment before answering quietly. Evelyn, he said immediately. Why am I hearing rumors that you are gone? I looked around the office one last time before stepping toward the elevator. Because, I told him softly, the rumors are true. The elevator ride down to the lobby lasted less than a minute, but it felt longer than some entire years I had spent inside that building. The mirrored walls reflected a woman I barely recognized anymore. Tailored gray blazer, low heels, gold watch, calm expression. The same woman who had once slept on a couch in her office during a merger crisis, because the board needed overnight projections before market open. Outside, Chicago rain tapped softly against the glass entrance while employees crossed the lobby pretending not to notice me standing there with a cardboard box in my arms. Corporate people become experts at avoiding discomfort. Richard stayed on the phone while I walked toward the parking garage beneath the building. Nobody informed us about leadership changes, he said carefully. That usually means something happened internally. I pressed the elevator button for the lower level and watched my reflection blur against the steel doors. Stratwell is restructuring, I answered. Apparently I no longer fit their future. Richard was quiet for several seconds. I knew that silence. Executives only went silent when they were calculating risk. Evelyn, he finally said, you have managed our account for 16 years. You handled every crisis personally. If you are gone, I need to know who is replacing you. The elevator doors opened to the concrete parking level. Cold air wrapped around me immediately. I reached my car and placed the box carefully in the passenger seat before answering him. That, I said softly, is probably the same question your board should be asking right now. By the time I pulled out of the parking garage, the rain had turned heavier, blurring the city lights into streaks of silver across my windshield. Chicago always looked colder after 5 o'clock, especially downtown where glass towers blocked out the last of the daylight. My phone continued vibrating against the center console every few minutes. Client. Colleagues. Unknown numbers from New York and Boston. I ignored most of them. Not because I was angry, but because I already understood something they were only beginning to realize. News traveled fast in corporate America when money was attached to it. I stopped at a red light near Wacker Drive and finally checked my email from my personal phone. 43 unread messages in less than an hour. 3 clients asking if I had resigned voluntarily. 2 executives requesting clarification regarding leadership transition. 1 recruiter from a competing firm asking if I was available for a confidential conversation. But 1 email caught my attention immediately. It came from Stratwell's internal communications department. Subject line: Organizational Leadership Update. I opened it slowly while rain tapped against the roof of my car. The company had already announced my departure to clients and staff. They described it as a strategic modernization initiative focused on next-generation engagement models. My name appeared once in the entire message. 24 years reduced to a single sentence between corporate buzzwords. I should have felt humiliated. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Because buried near the bottom of my inbox was another message, this one marked urgent. It came directly from Richard Dawson's executive assistant. Veritas Health Systems was requesting an emergency meeting first thing tomorrow morning. Not with Stratwell. With me. I barely slept that night. The rain continued for hours outside my condo windows while downtown traffic faded into distant echoes below the streetlights. My laptop sat unopened on the kitchen counter beside the severance folder Stratwell had handed me less than 12 hours earlier. I kept staring at it while the coffee in my mug slowly went cold. 24 years. I could still remember my first week at the company. The cheap gray cubicles. The outdated computers. The founder shaking my hand and telling me relationships mattered more than presentations. Back then, Stratwell had only 3 major accounts. By the time Ethan became Chief Executive Officer, I had helped grow that number into 42 national clients across healthcare, finance, and logistics. I knew which executives preferred handwritten notes after successful negotiations, which boards panicked during market dips, which clients secretly hated each other despite smiling together at conferences. Trust was never built inside meetings. It was built quietly over years. At 6:40 the next morning, my phone rang again. Richard Dawson. "We need to meet before our board call," he said immediately. "And Evelyn, you should know something else." I walked toward my living room window and looked down at the wet Chicago streets below. "What is it?" I asked quietly. Richard hesitated for a moment. "3 other clients contacted me last night after hearing about your termination. Nobody understands why Stratwell would remove the person managing their highest retention accounts." I closed my eyes briefly as dawn light reflected against the buildings across the river. Then he said the sentence that finally made everything feel real. "To be honest," he admitted carefully, "some of us are already considering whether we should continue doing business with them at all." The meeting with Veritas Health Systems took place inside a private executive dining room overlooking Lake Michigan. I arrived 10 minutes early out of habit, wearing the same navy blazer I had worn to hundreds of client negotiations over the years. The hostess recognized me immediately. That alone told me more than any market report could. Relationships outlive job titles. Richard was already seated when I entered, along with 2 board members I had worked with during the hospital network expansion 3 years earlier. Nobody asked about my termination directly at first. Corporate executives preferred circling uncomfortable truths before speaking them aloud. Coffee was poured. Small talk drifted across the table. Weather, quarterly forecasts, healthcare regulations. Then Richard finally leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Evelyn, we received 3 different calls from Stratwell leadership this morning." I remained quiet. None of them could answer basic operational questions about our account structure. He continued. "One executive actually asked us to resend internal transition documents you personally built." One of the board members sighed softly and shook his head. "That is concerning for a company managing this level of revenue." I looked out the window for a moment as gray waves rolled against the shoreline below. In another life, I might have defended Stratwell automatically. Loyalty had once felt natural to me. But loyalty without respect eventually becomes self-destruction. Richard slid a folder carefully across the table toward me. "No company logo. No branding. Just numbers. This is confidential," he said quietly. I opened it slowly and felt my pulse shift for the first time since being terminated. Inside was a proposal outline from one of Stratwell's direct competitors. And attached to the front page was a handwritten note. "If you decide to rebuild somewhere else, we would prefer to rebuild with you." 3 days after my termination, the rumors began spreading across the industry faster than Stratwell could contain them. Executive recruiters started calling former colleagues.
Client Kietli postpone renewal.
One logistics company suddenly requested a full audit of their consulting agreements before signing another extension. None of this happened publicly. Corporate collapses almost always begin in silence. I spent most of that week inside my condo, overlooking the river, taking calls from people who suddenly sounded far more respectful than they had a month earlier. Around noon on Friday, my former assistant Lauren called me from a private number. She sounded nervous. "Evelyn," she whispered. "There was an emergency leadership meeting this morning." I remained quiet while watching boats move slowly across the gray water below my balcony. "Veritas suspended their renewal discussions," she continued, "and 2 other healthcare accounts requested direct explanations from Ethan personally." I could already picture the atmosphere inside Stratwell's executive conference room. The polished table. The expensive monitors glowing with declining revenue projections. Young executives using words like repositioning and transition strategy, while pretending panic was not spreading beneath the surface. Lauren lowered her voice even further. "People are blaming human resources now. Ethan is furious because clients keep asking for you directly." I closed my eyes briefly. 24 years inside corporate America had taught me something simple. Companies never notice the people holding everything together until those people disappear. Later that evening, another email arrived from the competitor firm Richard had mentioned earlier in the week. This time it included a formal offer. Senior partner. Full client autonomy.
Equity participation.
I stared at the message for a long time before looking toward the city skyline outside my windows. Stratwell thought they had removed a liability from the company. They still had not realized they had amputated the part clients trusted most. I signed the partnership agreement the following Monday morning, inside a quiet corner office overlooking Madison Avenue in New York. No press release. No announcement on LinkedIn.
No dramatic celebration.
Just a fountain pen, a stack of legal documents, and a handshake from people who understood exactly what Stratwell had thrown away. The new firm operated differently. Smaller leadership structure. Fewer empty presentations. More respect for long-term relationships. By noon, my new company email was active, though I barely needed it. Clients were already calling my personal phone directly. Richard Dawson transferred first. Veritas Health Systems officially paused all negotiations with Stratwell and reopened discussions under my new team within 48 hours. Then came the logistics account from Dallas. Then the pharmaceutical group in Boston. One by one, years of trust quietly shifted direction. Nobody said the moves were about me publicly. Corporate executives rarely speak emotionally when millions of dollars are involved. They use phrases like continuity concerns and leadership confidence. But underneath all the polished language, the truth remained simple. They trusted the person, not the logo. Late Wednesday evening, Lauren called me again. This time she sounded exhausted. The board is in crisis mode, she admitted. Finance just calculated the projected losses. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the Manhattan skyline glowing outside the office windows. How bad is it? I asked calmly. There was a long pause before she answered. $290 million tied to accounts at risk of leaving. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Somewhere beyond the glass, traffic moved through the city below like rivers of white and red light. Then Lauren whispered something that almost made me smile. People here finally understand what you actually did for this company. I looked down at the new business card resting beside my hand. Different company name. Same experience. Same relationships. Same woman they once escorted out of a building carrying a cardboard box. 2 months later, I received an email from Ethan requesting a private meeting. The subject line simply said, "Conversation opportunity." I almost deleted it without opening it. Instead, I accepted. Not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to see whether success had finally taught him humility. We met at a quiet hotel lounge overlooking the Chicago River on a cold Thursday evening. The kind of place executives choose when they want difficult conversations hidden behind expensive furniture and low piano music. Ethan looked older than I remembered. Not physically, professionally. There is a specific exhaustion that settles into people after investors stop believing their answers. He stood when I approached the table, attempting a polite smile that disappeared almost immediately. "You look well," he said carefully. "I am well," I replied. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Outside the windows, snow drifted softly across the riverwalk below while office towers reflected silver against the dark water. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly and looked down at his untouched drink. "The board says we underestimated your value," he admitted quietly. I rested my hands calmly against the table and studied him for a moment. 24 years. Late nights. Missed birthdays. Endless flights. Crisis calls at 2 in the morning. I had given that company pieces of my life they could never repay. And still, they thought my value existed inside a title. "No," I said softly. "You underestimated where the value actually lived." Ethan looked at me without speaking. For the first time since my termination, he seemed to understand. The clients had never stayed because of branding campaigns or executive speeches or polished offices downtown. They stayed because someone answered every call, remembered every detail, protected every relationship like it mattered personally. Trust was never sitting inside Stratwell's systems. Trust had been sitting quietly in conference rooms, airports, hotel lounges, and late-night phone calls for 24 years. It had been sitting inside me. When the meeting ended, Ethan offered to walk me out, but I declined politely. I stepped into the winter air alone, my coat wrapped tightly against the cold as the city lights shimmered across the river beside me. My phone vibrated once before I reached the corner. Another client. Another opportunity. Another reminder that my career had never belonged to one company in the first place. Stratwell kept the office. The clients kept my number.